You're listening to Sports Radio Detroit.
Alright, hello everyone and welcome back to the final track review here on Sports Radio Detroit. As always, I'm your host Chris Platte. Hope everybody had a fantastic weekend. I'm very excited for today's episode. It is jam-packed. We got a lot of stuff going on. So I quickly want to shout out the Sports Radio Detroit Female Personality Contest that is ongoing. So if you have not participated yet, please participate. You can vote now just by going to the Detroit Sports Radio Detroit website, and you will find a link to vote on that. So go vote on that. And also, I just wanted to give a shout out to the Notorious B.I.G.'s Life After Death album, which just turned, I believe, 22 this week. I talked about it last week on the podcast when I kind of focused more on Biggie and less on that album. But I did touch on Life After Death, so that was a great episode. That was a fun episode, so go check that one out if you missed it. Now, today's podcast is going to be long. It's going to be long-winded, so I apologize in advance. You're gonna hear me probably have to stop and take a second to drink because it's gonna be a lot to talk about. So what I did is I created this hip-hop March Madness bracket, right? Because it's March Madness season, and everybody loves filling out brackets. And I was like, man, this is such a cool idea. What if I could apply it to hip-hop? And last year, we actually started to see this pop off with the Kanye and Kendrick Madness brackets. Those were very fun. I actually did those on my individual podcasts. So those were very fun. But this was something that I was planning for 3 years. This was 3 years of research I put into this one. So this is something that I've thought about for a long time. And I basically compiled, to make it short, I compiled a list of all of the greatest hip-hop albums and mixtapes of all time. And then kind of just counted out how many times each album or mixtape was mentioned in a list of the greatest from multiple credible publications. Of course, I wasn't looking at blog posts. I was looking at credible publications from sources like Rolling Stone, Hip Hop Golden Era, DJ Booth. A lot of credible sources went into this one. The Source, Vibe, all that stuff. So that being said, Complex as well, I should shout them out because they had quite a few lists that I looked at as well. So then I basically took and aggregated the scores from, again, all the credible publications, the review scores of each album in each tier, and that kind of decided it. So it ended up being 16 from each region. So we got the West, the North, the South, and the East. And the North, of course, is the Midwest plus Canada. And then the East is obviously the East Coast, and the West Coast. The South is the South. So I thought it was a cool idea. It was a way to have each region of hip hop represented because hip hop regions are important. Regions have always been just a huge staple in the culture of hip hop. So I feel like it is more than fair to have each region represented because I did multiple versions of this bracket. And the other ones where I didn't regard region were predominantly East and West albums, and that with little from the North and the South. And so I felt that the North and the South should be represented, not because of some just utopian vision, but because those are important in hip hop. Like the South runs hip hop today. They have a sound that is across pretty much any album, any hip-hop album released. And so the South has huge influence. The North had huge influences on hip-hop at one point in time. So all of these elements, or all of these regions, rather, needed to be represented. So that's why I constructed it the way I constructed it. But if you're looking for a more in-depth explanation to the process, you can check out my podcast, Strictly Hip Hop, which I actually have a guest on, and we have our own brackets, and we filled out a consensus bracket, so there was a lot of debate going on. It was a very, very long podcast, so I do, it's not actually out yet, but it will be out soon, but it was a very long process, so that's why I chose not to have a guest on this one, just because it would be so long-winded. The Kanye bracket I did last year ended up being over 3 hours, so I didn't want to bury you guys in content. I just wanted to give you something quick. So I'm going to try and make this as quick and efficient as possible. So I will be highlighting, the matchups in each round and then picking my winners. So it's split up into the South and the West are the two regions on the left side of the bracket, and the North and the East are the two regions on the right side of the bracket. And the bracket will be in the description, will be uploaded with the podcast, so be sure to check it out. And if you want, print it out, fill it out, and tag Sports Radio Detroit or myself at Real Chris Platte. I'd love to see what your guys' brackets look like. I'd love to see it because there's definitely going to be some upsets, and there's going to be a lot of debate, and that's why I tried to be hands off with the process of making the list, because I have bias like any other music listener. So I wanted to objectively resolve myself of any blame. So I did not have really any influence on what was on this list. I just aggregated all the information and went off the general consensus of what hip hop feels, the general consensus of what are the best projects from each region. Because from there, once it comes time to fill out the bracket, it is all subjective and just personal preference. So that's why I tried to eliminate myself from the actual making of the original like deciding what albums and mixtapes were in here. So we'll start with the South. So on the South side, we got the number 1 seed Riding Dirty versus Thug Motivation 101 by Young Jeezy. So UGK's Riding Dirty is an essential album. It's a credible album. I pick it to move on pretty easily, even though Thug Motivation 101, fun fact, was the first CD I ever bought, the first hip-hop CD I ever bought. And I was in 4th grade, so of course I had to get the clean version, or 4th grade, and I had to get the clean version. But it was an incredible and essential album in the 2000s, hip-hop in the South. But Riding Dirty UGK is one of the all-time greatest albums, not only just in the South, but in hip-hop in general. So Riding Dirty moves on very easily. I'll save more of my arguments for Riding Dirty when it gets to tougher matchups. So then this was a tough one, the next one, which was 8 and 9, Trap or Die versus Lil Wayne's The Carter 3. I went with the Carter 3 personally, even though Trap or Die is arguably the best mixtape of all time. It is definitely a top 5 mixtape, probably top 3 all time. And once again, that is by Young Jeezy. And it's a huge, it was a moment in the South. But 2008, the Carter 3 by Lil Wayne, man, that is just peak apex Wayne. With his ability to mesh pop and hip hop so well. He was a rock star. He dominated the charts. He was the center of the universe when it came to hip hop music at that time, and he was just an absolute beast. And I think the Carter 3 is his best album to this day. So I picked the Carter 3, but it was a tough matchup. Number 5, we have The Diary by Scarface versus number 12, The Carter 2. So The Carter 2 is a great album. Once again, Lil Wayne. I feel it's slightly below The Carter 3, but that's kind of subjective and up for debate. You'll get a lot of people that debate those back and forth. But I went with The Diary pretty easily over The Carter 2 just because the rapping and instrumentation of The Diary from Scarface is just so representative of the South and so influential. Like, you can see not only is Scarface capturing the South sonically, but he is also creating the blueprint for other artists to use in the future to kind of build that southern sound in hip hop. So The Diary moves on over The Carter 2 pretty easily. Next, I got Aquemini vs. 400 Degrees by Juvenile. So Aquemini, Outkast, great album. This one moves on because just the eclectiveness of Outkast is just so special to me. You're getting, from one song to next, you don't know what you're going to get. You know you're going to get something crazy with Outkast every time they rap, every track they're on, but you really don't know because they cross so many genres, they do so many things, and they kind of break so many barriers. So Outkast moves on pretty easily because I just think this is one of the greatest albums in the South. So Gemini moves on there pretty easily. Then next, I got the Drought 3 versus Dirty Sprite 2. This was a tough one. The Drought 3 is arguably, again, one of the best mixtapes of all time. You're going to hear me say that because there's only a few mixtapes made this, and a lot of them actually were from the South. But the Drought 3 by Lil Wayne is just Lil Wayne. It's a 2-disc mixtape where he is just absolutely snapping over everything, taking all of the hottest beats and just going in. And that, to me, despite Dirty Sprite 2 and its influence in the South, Future, that is a huge wave, a huge moment in the history of South hip hop. But to me, the Drought 3, I just enjoy it more. There's definitely some awesome highlights in Dirty Sprite 2 that I really, really enjoy. And the Drought 3 just gives me more because I enjoy the bars. I enjoy Wayne snapping. I'm a Lil Wayne fan, so it's probably a little bit biased, but I'm rolling with the Drought 3. So if you have not heard that, go check it out. It's not on streaming services. It's on DatPiff, so go give that a listen if you're unaware. But it is peak Wayne rapping his ass off, so I highly recommend it. So then next we got number 3, Speaker Box, The Love Below versus number 14, AT Aliens, both Outkast albums. So AT Aliens moves on for me just because of the simple fact that the Speaker Box, Love Below is a Big Boy album and an Andre album, but they have features on each other's albums, but this is pretty much the end of Outkast as we know it. And AT Aliens just had had a higher hit ratio when it came to, or a higher batting average, I should say, because hit ratio makes it seem like I'm saying commercial records. And the Speaker Box and Love Below had way more commercial records. But AT Aliens' batting average was so high because that's only, I believe, 16 or 18 tracks versus the Speaker Box Love Below, which is 20 on each side, or I think it's 18 and 20, or 18 and 22, I believe. And so there's just a lot that gets skipped on Speaker Box Love Below. Like I can't tell you the last time I listened to Speaker Box and Love Below back to back, like just front to back the entire thing. That's 2 straight hours of listening. That's a little bit too much for me, as great as Outkast is. But AT Aliens to me is just consistently better. Okay, next we got Soul Food versus Dedication 2. Dedication 2 by Lil Wayne is a very interesting mixtape where he is, once again, kind of doing the same thing he did in the Drought 3, which is take the hottest instrumentals and rap over them. So it's highly entertaining. But to me, Soul Food, just the polished instrumentation, Goody Mob just absolutely doing their thing on that album. It's a very good album. It's one I highly enjoy, one of my favorite Southern albums of all time. So it moves on against the Dedication 2. In Search Of by NERD, the 2 seed, a very, very interesting, and I don't know how many people know this album because it is a Pharrell hip-hop band, and it's really dope. Their instrumentation, again, their way of blending genres, much like Outkast, is very, very awesome, and it has a lot of great, amazing instrumentals, amazing songwriting. You actually go back to that nowadays, and you'll see a lot of Childish Gambino influence in Pharrell's singing, and it's a great album. Don't get me wrong, but number 15, Trap Music by T.I., I mean, that was just a moment in the South, an absolute moment. And it is a track, intro to outro, absolutely fire. The Doing My Job Kanye beat is amazing. T.I. is just incredible. This to me is, again, being a huge T.I. fan, so maybe I'm a little bit biased. Trap Music is incredible, and it moves on for me just slightly. So that completes the first round of the South region. Let's do the first round of the West. So the West, we got number 1, The Chronic versus number 16, The Documentary. The Chronic moves on pretty easily. Games Documentary was a great album, a great moment in West, put the West Coast back on the map after a little bit of a dry spell. But The Chronic is The Chronic. I mean, you hear the hip hop albums, the greatest hip hop albums of all time, and the Chronic is always mentioned in that discussion. So the Chronic moves on pretty easily, no disrespect to the game. One of my favorite rappers. Moving on, we got Ice Cube in a bad draw. He actually got the 8 and 9 seed in both his solo albums, America's Most Wanted and Death Certificate. Now, this is this is a debate where if you were to poll 100 people, it'd probably be 50-50 or 45-55. It'd be a very close split on who prefers what album. I'm going with America's Most Wanted just because, to me, I really enjoyed the skits. The skits were awesome and entertaining on America's Most Wanted. And just this, America's Most Wanted was just overall more enjoyable. I enjoyed the song slightly more. I enjoyed Ice Cube slightly more. Even though I enjoyed Death Certificate, and it has one of the greatest moments, and that's that No Vaseline diss, which if you watch the Straight Outta Compton movie, that is one of the funniest scenes of all time. I love that scene. But America's Most Wanted moves on. So, number 5, Damn by Kendrick Lamar, which was a very surprising one when I was doing the rankings, versus Don Killuminati, The 7 Day Theory, Machiavelli, a.k.a. Tupac. This was his last album. This came out shortly after he was murdered. The release date got moved up once he was murdered in September. And The 7 Day Theory, this was actually an album that was done before he passed. So this was the last kind of, even though it was past his life, it's really considered the end of the last Tupac album before you get all the posthumous albums that he released, which was many in my opinion, one too many. But the Damn is great. Damn is it's commercial, but it's got so much substance with it. It's Kendrick, from a writing standpoint, I think it's, in an MC standpoint, I think it's Kendrick's best album yet. I'll say from an MC standpoint, not from a writing standpoint, and we'll get to that breakdown probably at some point in this podcast. But it's got the hits, it's got DNA, it's got loyalty, it's got humble. But to me, as a huge Tupac fan, and Kendrick's my favorite artist, so I mean even more of a Kendrick fan than I am a Tupac fan, but I love me some Tupac. With Machiavelli, it just put a bow on Tupac's career so perfectly when the intro is talking about how he's ready to go to war against the East Coast and he's ready for a battle, and then he ends the album with that same thought, against all odds, talking about how I will always persevere. I am ready to go to war. I am ready to die, if that's what it takes. And unfortunately, the dark poetic justice of it, or the dark poetic truth of it, I should say, is very, very, is very, very just, it hits you every time you listen to it. And like To Live and Die in LA, that's a song I've honestly cried to. I mean, that is a beautiful, beautiful song. It is a staple in Tupac's career, and this was just an album that had moments that Damn just didn't have for me. Damn had great moments. Like Feel is an awesome moment where Kendrick is very open, very vulnerable, very introspective, but we get that a lot with Kendrick. Duckworth was an awesome story that that talked about his father. His father worked at a KFC, and Top Dog, the person who signed Kendrick, was out on the streets robbing, and so his dad used to always hook Top Dog up with some extra biscuits in his KFC orders. So then one day when Top Dog came to rob the KFC, he spared Kendrick Lamar's father's life. And now it's a crazy story, because think about all the chain of reactions that wouldn't of how just different, how many lives were altered, because we wouldn't get the Kendrick Lamar we have today if that story went a different way. And so it was an awesome way to wrap up a theme about God. So Damn is an incredible album, don't get me wrong, but to me, the moments, the power of To Live and Die in LA, of Against All Odds, of Hail Mary, one of the biggest records of all time. It's just Machiavelli, Tupac moves on. So Number 4, we got Doggy Style by Snoop Dogg, and then we got number 13, In a Major Way by E40. Okay, this one was pretty easy. It was Doggy Style. Snoop Dogg this is Snoop Dogg at his absolute apex, just being an awesome, incredible rapper, and his ability to just be a personality with the skits and also just be an artist with the cohesion of the project is really just bar none to me. And this is one of the greatest albums of all time. So Doggy Style moves on pretty easily. No disrespect to E40 In a Major Way, which is a classic album and a great album to listen to just front to back. E40 just has that bounce, has that fun to it. It's a very dope record. So check that one out if you haven't heard it. I know a lot of my generation doesn't necessarily go back to E40 the way they do Snoop Dogg and Dr. Dre and Tupac, but it's an album that you definitely shouldn't sleep on. Number 6, I got All Eyes on Me versus number 11, Bizarre Ride 2, The Far Side. Now this one was pretty easy to me. All Eyes on Me has its flaws, so we'll get to that when it's in a tougher matchup. Bizarre Ride 2, The Far Side is a great album, don't get me wrong. This is one of those albums that when I first started the process years ago, it was an album that I was not up on, but I kept seeing it on every single list of every single publication. I'm like, man, they're saying this is one of the best West Coast albums of all time. Like, I gotta check this out, because people may not know this from listening to the podcast, but if you listen to my podcast, you definitely know how much I love the West Coast music. It is my favorite type of hip hop. I love the soothing synths. I love the spacey vibes it gives me, and just the warmth that the West Coast sound brings to me. Mixed with the bounce that just gives it a level of fun. And Bizarre Ride 2, The Far Side has a lot of that in it. But if I'll be honest with you, there are a lot of moments on here, or not a lot, I should say, a few moments on here that teeter on corny as far as the rapping goes. So that to me, versus All Eyes on Me, which is when you're talking about hip hop albums, West Coast hip hop albums, you are not going to name 5 albums before you name All Eyes on Me. All Eyes on Me is one of the most important albums in the history of West Coast hip hop. So this is Tupac. This is a moment right after he comes out of jail and signs to Death Row, drops this massive double album, one of the highest selling albums of all time. Just an incredible album with Tupac just, being in a whole nother level, in a whole nother stratosphere than he was when he dropped Me Against the World in terms of his mind state. So All Eyes on Me moves on. Now let's do one of the probably tougher debates in the first round across the board, and that is To Pimp a Butterfly at number 3 versus Me Against the World, Tupac. And Me Against the World, Tupac is great. It's a moment. It has the record Dear Mama. Dear Mama is in the Library of Congress. This is an essential album. This is Tupac's most introspective and open album. It, to me, has showed the most growth in the history of Tupac. At any point in his career, I never saw more growth than in Me Against the World. And he really just gave an authentic and true side to him. He really showed all his true colors on this album, and I really enjoyed it. And also, he did a great job delegating. He knew when to put a feature on a record. He knew when to put a sample on a record. So he just managed it perfectly, because that's kind of a flaw with some of his other work, is that sometimes he'll just throw somebody on a record and it doesn't turn out well. But Tupac did great, but the guest doesn't, and so he hasn't always had the greatest ear for features. But this was an album where he absolutely did that. But To Pimp a Butterfly, man, is an incredible album. And if I'll be honest with you, this was a tough matchup, a tough first round matchup. But to me, what separates it with To Pimp a Butterfly is you have this album that incorporates rap, funk, soul, jazz, trap, poetry, hip hop, even journalism, with an interview at the end of Tupac, which is a crazy thing. And this poem is just leading one song into the next. You could take out all these records, and they have their own story. They have their own theme to them. But then you put them in the album, and then all of a sudden it is the album is an entire journey. It starts from the fact that Kendrick is starting with, when I get signed, homie, I'm gonna act a fool in the intro track, and then it goes to the end, Mortal Man, where he's talking about if shit hits the fan, are you still a fan? Do you believe in me? And he's speaking from the perspective of, look, I am the leader of this generation. I want to be the leader of this generation. And so just the growth that you show in not only Kendrick, but just also the themes of black empowerment, of self-love, self-hate, battling religion, how do you justify your religion, versus your actions. And it's a beautiful, beautiful album, and it's an album that every time I listen to it, it's my favorite album of all time. But when I listen to it each time, I'm still pulling out things like, there's records like track 6 will connect with track 13. One line from each song will connect, and it's just this massive standpoint. And that's what I mean by writing. Damn, as an MC, Kendrick was rapping exceptionally well. It was the best rapping I ever heard Kendrick doing. But as far as writing, as far as being able to write so strategically and so conceptual, made To Pimp a Butterfly better. And that's why I pick it over Me Against the World, is because it has an extremely high degree of difficulty, and it has an extreme and it's executed perfectly. So that's why To Pimp a Butterfly moves on for me. Then next, I got Good Kid, Mad City at 7 versus DJ Quick Is the Name at 10. Now, DJ Quick is a founder. In fact, DJ Quick is one of the pioneers who influenced the sound into Pimp a Butterfly. He's just an influential DJ in the history of West Coast music in general. He's known for bringing a lot of that funk to the West Coast. And I love some of the records on there, like Quick's Groove. That instrumental is one of my favorite instrumentals of all time. So I do want to shout that out, because I feel like this is going to be the one in everybody's bracket that I skip over, because Good Kid, Mad City is what it is. But Good Kid, Mad City is just, to me, is a phenomenal album, and I'll kind of save its argument when it gets to a tougher matchup. But Good Kid, Mad City does move on. But I did want to just give a shout out to DJ Quick Is the Name, because that is an exceptional album as well. So then we got the last one to round out the West. We got Straight Outta Compton versus The Chronic 2001. Now, The Chronic 2001, Dr. Dre is a great album, has great moments. Forgot About Dre, Explosive, The Next Episode, a lot of records that you all know. It's also kind of serves as a coming out party for Eminem. Even though he had just released the Slim Shady LP before that, this was a moment where Eminem was just kind of starting his peak, and the Chronic 2001 greatly captured that. A lot of people think no, it was not dropped in 2001. It was dropped in 1999. So just to let you know, to not make that mistake. But anyway, Straight Outta Compton, to me, talk about the history of West Coast, the influence of West Coast. Straight Outta Compton moves on, because it is an album that not only has great music, but you're talking about Straight Outta Compton is the birth of a lot of these albums. It spawned the careers of Dr. Dre, Ice Cube, Eazy-E, MC Ren, DJ Yella. Like, these are influential people in the history of the West Coast. And then think about the people that they began to touch. Dr. Dre, his West Coast influence, him, getting Snoop Dogg, working with Tupac, working with The Game, working with, of course, Eminem, who's not a West Coast artist, but that, you just span out the tree from Straight Outta Compton, and it is nuts, the impact. Eazy-E, Bone Thugs and Harmony, so it's like there's just so much influence there behind that album, and the album is just, to me, overall greater than The Chronic 2001. So Straight Outta Compton moves on. So that completes the first half of the first round. So that's the West and the South are complete. Now let's jump to the North. If you're following along, if you're not following along, I encourage you to. It makes this podcast sound seem a lot easier and sound a lot more cohesive. But we're jumping to the North now, the upper right region of the bracket. And we got My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy versus Bad Meets Evil 1 verse 16. My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy moves on very easily. Bad Meets Evil has its flaws. I mean, it's great rapping from Eminem and Royce, but from the production side, I didn't like a lot of the production on this album. In fact, Bad Meets Evil and Watch the Throne were released within a year of each other, and you can see which one had staying power and which one didn't as far as the production and the instrumentation. Nobody's making any records that sound like anything on Bad Meets Evil now, and everybody's still trying to make beats like Watch the Throne to this day. So Bad Meets Evil, the production side, killed it for me. My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, on the opposite end of the spectrum, is one of the most flawlessly produced albums. And yes, Kanye had a lot of help making it, but the end product is just nowhere near close to Bad Meets Evil. Or Bad Meets Evil, I'm sorry, is nowhere near close to the end product of My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. So this next one, is going to pit a lot of fan bases against each other. Two fan bases, two intense fan bases against each other. One is much bigger than the other, but that being said, that smaller fan base is just as intense. So we got Food and Liquor by Lupe Fiasco at number 8 versus number 9, Take Care, Drake. Now, I know a lot of people from my generation love Take Care. They will die for Take Care. That is their favorite album of all time, or one of their favorite albums of all time. That is a influential moment in all of their lives. Middle school, high school. And it played a role in my life. But I'm going with Food and Liquor in the upset here. Even though it's the higher seed, it still feels like it's going to be the upset. I would guess that 90% of brackets have Take Care moving on, but Food and Liquor by Lupe Fiasco is incredible. I mean, that is often you see when the anniversary of Food and Liquor drops, Twitter goes nuts. My timeline always goes nuts, talking about the most forgotten classic of all time, this and that. The album's great. It has commercial records like Kick Push, but also has better rapping, more substance, and less fat than Take Care. My main issue with Take Care is that it has a couple tracks in there that I would skip. It has 3 to 5 records that I'm just they're not terrible, but I'm not really listening to them. Like, I could throw on Food and Liquor and listen to that whole thing front to back, whatever I'm doing, whether I'm just chilling at the house playing 2K, or whether I'm hanging with friends or whatever. Food and Liquor is an album that I can throw on, and it is just a dope album. But it also has better rapping and more substance, and I just enjoy Food and Liquor for that. So Food and Liquor moves on over Take Care, which I know will be an upset in a lot of people's brackets. But Food and Liquor moving on. Okay, number 5, Late Registration versus number 12, Watch the Throne. So the reason Watch the Throne came up on this album, or on the North bracket, is because even though Kanye's from technically the North division or region, and Jay is from the East region, this really is, between the production and the rapping, this feels more like a Kanye album featuring Jay-Z. So Watch the Throne ended up in the North. That's how it ended up here. But Late Registration, Watch the Throne was such a moment in hip hop, right? Like, it was this moment where these two megastars are colliding to make this awesome collaboration album. But Late Registration, to me, is just, that's arguably one of Kanye's best bodies of work. It's awesome. It's got some of Kanye's most iconic songs, We Major, Gold Digger, Touch the Sky, Hey Mama. Late Registration is just awesome, man. It's really just awesome. And to me, Watch the Throne kind of cools off a little bit towards the end here and there. But, despite my love for Jay-Z and for Kanye, Late Registration moves on slightly. I just enjoy Late Registration more. I think it had a better batting average, 1 through 18 for Late Registration. So then next we got Eminem Show versus Nothing Was the Same. Nothing Was the Same is arguably Drake's best project. I'm starting to come around. I've really wavered this last year between its Take Care, Nothing Was the Same is so far gone, deciding what Drake's best body of work is. I don't know what it is anymore. I like to say So Far Gone. I've said So Far Gone as recently as a month ago, but sometimes when I listen to Nothing Was the Same, like I did in preparation for this podcast, I was like, damn, this is so good. Drake absolutely killed this album. But the Eminem Show is the Eminem Show. It is regarded as one of the greatest albums of all time for a reason. It is Eminem at his peak, just his ability to not only embrace his persona and who he is at that point in his career, but also to play into that with records like Till I Collapse, with records like White America. Eminem just had so many moments that just stand alone on this project, and so Eminem Show moves on pretty easily. Next, we got probably the most interesting contrast in terms of content in this entire bracket, and that's we got at 6 the Slim Shady LP versus number 11 the Coloring Book by Chance the Rapper. Coloring Book was one, I'll be honest with you, I was surprised it made the list, and I was surprised how high it ended up, but it's a very critically acclaimed project, so that's why it ended up where it ended up. But just talk about two totally different albums when it comes to the tone of it. Slim Shady LP is, rapping about rape, about violence, about just all sorts of dark stuff, versus the Coloring Book, which is all just about loving each other and praising God and all that. And I really enjoy Coloring Book, don't get me wrong, but Slim Shady LP, just the rapping of it and just what it did for hip hop, Slim Shady LP was one of those records that when it came out, it flipped everybody on its head, on their heads, and they were like, "What the hell is this? What is happening?" And so Slim Shady LP was just a bigger moment than Chance Coloring Book, so that's why it moves on for me. So moving on now, we got number 3, The College Dropout, versus number 14, 808s and Heartbreak. College Dropout moves on. 808s and Heartbreak is one of my personal favorite albums of all time. Love that album so much. But the College Dropout wins just because it's deeper and has better records overall than 808s and Heartbreak does. 808s and Heartbreak, as much as I love it, there's still some songs on there that I'm lukewarm on. And when it comes to College Dropout, man, that's just an album that just doesn't really miss. You got All Falls Down, you got We Don't Care, you got Jesus Walks, you got the new workout plan, you got all these entertaining skits as well that take it to another level. You got The Last Call, where Kanye's just talking and rapping, and it's such a dope record when he tells that story. So I really, really enjoy this. So College Dropout moves on. This is the emergence of Kanye, this big moment in hip-hop. College Dropout moves on slightly. Sorry, 808s and Heartbreak, as I love you. This is one of the toughest matchups in the first round. Okay, next, we got Common's album, B, versus Graduation, the 7 and the 10 matchup. Common, B at number 7. Graduation, Kanye West at number 10. Boy, this was another tough one because at first I penciled in Graduation because Graduation, okay, obviously everything I said about 808s and Heartbreak, I can echo with Graduation, one of my favorite albums ever. Just an album that holds a lot of weight to me. I remember walking the halls in high school. In high school, anyone who's been through high school knows what a trying time it is, or is going through it now. If you're listening to a podcast, you know what a trying time it is mentally on you trying to find your place in the world. And Graduation to me was one of those albums that really kind of resonated and grabbed me during that time. So I really have an emotional connection to it. But Common's B is an incredible, incredible album. So it loses to Graduation slightly, but I do want to shout out just some of the records that I highly encourage, because I feel like a lot of my generation in particular was just we were a little bit too young to hit the Common wave, because this album dropped in 2005. But the song Go and Testify and They Say with Kanye West and John Legend, these are great songs, and this is a Common album that has a lot of Kanye production and collaboration to it. So Common's B album, if you're a Kanye fan, you'll definitely like B, because there's a lot of excellent rapping, but just the moments of graduation between Flashing Lights, one of Kanye's best songs of all time. Talking about Everything I Am, Homecoming, Stronger, I Wonder is such a song I hold near and dear to my heart personally. Good Morning, just so many moments on graduation. Good Life with T-Pain, God, man, that's just a very tough record to beat. So graduation moves on. Then the last matchup in the North region, we got the Marshall Mathers LP by, of course, none other than Eminem versus number 15, So Far Gone by Drake. So Far Gone, again, a top 5 mixtape. You'll see that pretty much all of the top 5 mixtapes made this list, and those were the only mixtapes that made this list because they were the best of the best. And So Far Gone is a great mixtape, but Marshall Mathers LP, come on, man. Eminem is just absolutely rapping his ass off. And you go back to the records and just, again, the moment it created with the real Slim Shady, with Stan. Think about how commonly the word Stan is used in today's society. Eminem made a moment and made an influence that a lot of people don't recognize. And the Marshall Mathers LP is so great for so many reasons. Just the song Marshall Mathers in general is awesome Eminem rapping, but throughout this whole album, he's rapping excellent. And, there's some moments where it can teeter on a little bit uncomfortable or corny, but I think that's also what makes Eminem great, is that he really just keeps you on a tightrope the whole time you're listening to his music. But that being said, it moves on over So Far Gone, because So Far Gone is, as great as that project is, as great as that mixtape is, the Marshall Mathers LP is just easily, it's considered one of the best albums in the history of hip hop. So this is not even close, not even up for debate. But I will say that I guarantee there's going to be a lot of people, because there's a lot of Drake fans that will take So Far Gone over the Marshall Mathers LP, and I get it. It's easier to relate to Drake's vulnerability and openness than it is Eminem's wanting to go on a rampage and kill his baby mother and all these things. So I get it. Trust me, I totally get it. I don't really identify with a lot of what Eminem's saying on the record in the Marshall Mathers LP, but just the rapping ability and his just the technicality of his rapping is so amazing, and it blows me away every time I listen to it. So Marshall Mathers LP does move on, but you're gonna see a lot of brackets that will put So Far Gone, and that to me is blasphemous. But hey, just my opinion. That's why I'm doing this podcast, and that's why I put this bracket out here for everybody to have an opinion. So let's move on to the East region and finish up the round of 64. Then it goes pretty fast after that. So we got number 1 Illmatic versus number 16 It's Dark Hell Is Hot. Now this is a tough matchup. I went with Illmatic. Obviously the tough matchup was sarcastic by me, so if you didn't catch that tone, sorry about that. But Illmatic is an amazing album, Nas's best, Nas's peak, and ready, and It's Dark Hell Is Hot is a great album by DMX. It's a moment in hip hop, but Illmatic is Illmatic. So that next we got number 8 Ready to Die versus number 9 3 Feet High and Rising by De La Soul. So Biggie versus De La Soul, again, contrasting styles to say the least. But I actually, when it came down to it, this was one of the tougher matchups again in the first round. I ended up going with 3 Feet High and Rising by the slightest margin, and I know that's crazy, but to me the skits were so entertaining. Just the instrumentation and production was so awesome and so different than what we normally hearing from East Coast in that time. So De La Soul just to me kind of grabbed me from that moment. And then we have, so De La Soul moves on. So then we have number 5 Only Built for Cuban Links versus number 12 The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. Now, Lauryn Hill is an incredible artist, and I really love her to death. And so that is why I actually have her moving on over Only Built for Cuban Links by Raekwon. I know the older generation is going to be mad at me. Please don't think I'm not one of those people that doesn't appreciate that album, because that album is amazing. but I don't know. I love the melodies of Lauryn Hill. I love the way she's able to rap her ass off when she wants to, but also she really kind of put together the blueprint for what we have with Drake because Lauryn Hill was somebody who could rap and sing and not be afraid to do both. Like a lot of times when she's rapping, she'll have melodies in the background that she's singing, or she'll be rapping and then the hook will be a melody of her just singing. And she just, to me, was one of the more perfect artists. And I know she had a lot of help with this album, and I know there's a lot of controversy around this album, but if I'm being honest with you, I'm returning to the Miseducation of Lauryn Hill more than I'm returning to Only Built for Cuban Links, and that's just my personal taste. I wouldn't knock anybody in the world who disagrees with me, and I know I'm probably in the minority when it comes to this album, and this album is probably the greatest testament to a generational difference, but hey, that's just my opinion. So Miseducation of Lauryn Hill moves on. Then I got number 4, Reasonable Doubt, versus number 13, The Black Album, by Jay-Z, both Jay-Z albums, I should say. And Reasonable Doubt moves on. It was an album that when it popped off, or when it first came out, it didn't pop off, and then a couple years later it started to pop off and get its appreciation. But it is Reasonable Doubt has so many dope records on it. The Black Album was a bigger moment when it was released because it was the retirement of Jay-Z, and it was this spectacle, and the show at the Garden, and all of those things are moments in hip-hop. But Reasonable Doubt to me is just a better body of work. I feel Jay-Z is rapping better. I don't think the production's better. The production on the Black Album is amazing, but Reasonable Doubt is, again, one of those albums that's just considered one of the greatest of all time. And the Black Album, as great as it is, it's not in that same realm to me, in my personal opinion. So moving on, we got number 6, Paid in Full, Eric B. and Rakim, versus number 11, Life After Death. Life After Death is a tough matchup for Paid in Full, and that's why I have Life After Death moving on, just because as much as I love Paid in Full, like, look, I know it's easy to kind of chalk it up as, oh, you're a 90s baby, so of course you're going to pick Biggie over Eric B. and Rakim. It was like almost a decade before I was born. It was 9 years before I was born when that album came out. But I do really love Paid in Full. I ain't no joke. The melodies, just all these records of mine off Paid in Full that I really do enjoy and I listen to quite often. But Life After Death, again, man, that was a moment. And Biggie just really, really popped off, and with that record, he showed his ability to have commercial records and substance, and he showed that with Ready to Die, of course, don't get me wrong, but I'm just comparing it to Paid in Full. Paid in Full had a bunch of just dope records on it that are easy to listen to and fun, but Life After Death had all sorts of records for any type of fan of hip-hop, and it was just a much completer body of work. And I got to give him the higher degree of difficulty like I gave to Pimp a Butterfly. Like, double albums are hard to make because it's hard to entertain somebody for 2 full albums. But Biggie did that all the way through. It is entertaining. I do not throw on Life After Death and get bored 5, 6, 7 tracks in and be like, okay, let me listen to something else. I don't, because Biggie is versatile enough. The production is great. Biggie's rapping is great. So Life After Death moves on over Paid in Full just because of that degree of difficulty. So next, we got The Low End Theory by Tribe Called Quest versus number 14, Black Star. Now, number 14, Black Star, is a great album that is something that I feel is extremely low and criminally underrated when it comes to East Coast hip-hop albums. But this bracket, the East region was the toughest region. When I was making this bracket, the East region was the region that got screwed because there's a lot of great albums. There's no Run DMC on here. There's no Big Pun. There's no Big L. You could have put even, more Tribe Called Quest on here. Or, more Jay-Z on here. So there's a lot of great albums that were left off the East bracket. But Black Star to me being 14 was just criminally underrated, and it was amazing. So that's why I'm actually going with it over Low End Theory, not because of some underdog mentality, but the reason to me is I just love the production and the rapping is stellar. Low End Theory slightly loses me, you know, from time to time. Like I'm not always in the mood to listen to that album front to back, but Black Star is just, man, again, Black Star is an album that I can throw on. So any time, any day, and just sit with it and rock with it for 5, 6, 7, the whole album, and just be totally happy with it. So Black Star, Talib Kweli, and Mos Def. Moving on over the Low End Theory of Tribe Called Quest. So I got an upset there. Number 7, Wu-Tang Clan, 36 Chambers versus number 10, Blueprint. Okay, now this is going to get somebody else mad. Again, I know the influence of Wu-Tang, 36 Chambers. I don't deny the greatness of that album. I'm not going to call anybody in the world crazy who picks Wu-Tang, 36 Chambers over Blueprint. But if I'll be honest with you, I enjoy Blueprint more. And that's probably because Jay-Z is one of my favorite artists. And Jay-Z, when it comes to this album, this was one of his most vulnerable albums before 444. And the Blueprint really just kind of, Jay-Z opened up a lot with records like Song Cry, and Renegade he opened up as well. And so it was really a refreshing, it was really a moment in Jay-Z's catalog. And some people even argue this is Jay-Z's best album. And so that to me, I don't think it's as blasphemous as people make it for me to pick the Blueprint over, Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers, but I know there's going to be a huge section of hip hop that's going to be aggravated with that pick. So I'm sorry. I apologize. It's just my opinion. But, 36 Chambers is an awesome album. Don't get me wrong. But the Blueprint to me just entertains me more. The Takeover record, again, this wasn't a moment that I lived through because I kind of got all of these a lot of these albums in the past tense. But Takeover is such a moment in hip hop history, and I just enjoy that song so much. I love me some beef, and the Jay-Z Nas beef is one of my favorite beefs of all time, and I think one of the best hip hop beefs of all time. I think if you ask any hip hop fan. But anyways, I'm getting off on a side tangent. Blueprint moves on to me. So sorry, Wu-Tang fans. I know I already killed you with, with taking Only Built for Cuban Links out in the first round and now 36 Chambers. You guys are probably thinking I hate Wu-Tang. That's not true, but, that's the narrative. I'll rock with it. Number 2, we got It Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back versus number 15, Get Rich or Die Trying. It Takes a Nation of Million to Hold Us Back is really dope. Public Enemy is so influential in the history of hip hop. And, Chuck D is one of the greatest rappers of all time. Extremely criminally underrated. But Get Rich or Die Trying is really dope. Obviously, that's the album that I listened to more, that I more grew up on, that was more my era. But I just will say Public Enemy, I enjoy it because it's one of those albums that even though it's older, even though it's past my generation of hip hop, it's still an album where it takes me to a place, it takes me to a time, it takes me to 1980s, just with the social commentary content as well as just the rapping style, of course, and the production style. But it puts me in a moment, and I've always said this about hip hop albums, is to me what makes an album great is when you can create a moment, and Public Enemy did that with this record, and you talk to anyone in the history of hip hop, and they're going to say that Chuck D inspired them. Any artist in the game, Chuck D inspired them. And so there's definitely the influence there. There's the legacy, and a lot of these records, they sound like they were made in 1980s, but they don't sound like they're terrible, or they don't sound like they're they're totally outdated or washed. Some records from the 80s, if I keep it honest with you, should be left in the 80s. Like, in my personal opinion, like, some of those albums just aren't that great. Some of those projects don't connect with me. But It Takes a Nation of Millions by Public Enemy connects with me. And so that's why I have it moving on. I think it's a great, great album. So it moves on over Get Rich or Die Trying. So that completes the round of 64. We're about 55 minutes in here, so I think I'm going to split this into 2 podcasts, just kind of give you some more content over the rest of the week. So if you're looking for more content when it comes to this bracket, I will have more next week. But for now, I'm going to kind of pace myself and kind of release this over the rest of the tournament and kind of keep you updated as the tournament goes along. So thank you everyone for listening to this very long-winded podcast. Once again, I'm your host, Chris Platte. This is the last track review here on Sports Radio Detroit. If you do not already, subscribe to the Sports Radio Detroit feed. Follow them on Facebook on their fan page. Follow them on Twitter as well. They have great content on Twitter as well. They're always putting out their content. That's a great way to catch all of their content. That's how I catch a lot of their posts, because sometimes it doesn't come, their podcast doesn't come up in my feed, even though I'm subscribed to them, because I'm subscribed to a ton of podcasts. So Twitter is a great way to also keep up with them. So turn on tweet notifications to let yourself be notified whenever they are making an announcement or dropping something. They're very good. They're not one of those publications that tweet out a whole bunch of stuff, a whole bunch of nothing all the time just to stay relevant. So if you turn on tweet notifications like I have them on, you're able to catch all of the content. They'll either announce when they're dropping something, or they'll be dropping something with every tweet. So it'll be very, very easy to follow and keep up with Sports Radio Detroit. So do that if you haven't, and if you would like to follow me and talk more about this bracket, what you think, what did you think of my process? What's your bracket look like? All of that. Please reach me on Twitter at @RealChrisPlatte, or Instagram if you prefer that. I know a lot of people prefer Instagram over Twitter nowadays, but hey, find me on either one of those 2 platforms and reach out to me. I'd love to hear feedback on what you think of my bracket and what you think of, and just how difficult was your bracket. Was it something you spent 5 minutes on, or was it something like me where you spent 2 hours on? So, I really want to hear everybody's process. I really want to hear everybody's thoughts. And as March Madness continues, this bracket will continue. So thank you, everyone, for listening, and I'll see you next week with some more.
This has been an SRD production.
Hi, this is Jason Pinkett from Pucking Around and Spinning the Wheels on Sports Radio Detroit. Check us out every Sunday over on the SRD Hockey feed on Spotify, TuneIn Radio, Podbean, iTunes, and Stitcher. That's SRD Hockey in your search bar. New episodes every week.